Welcome back to the channel. How responsible are the media for the situation that sees Owen Farrell, for the time being, maybe forever, we'll wait and see, stepping away from international rugby? That's what I'm talking about in this video, something that came to light in a conversation which quite quickly started after Farrell announced his decision to step away from the international game for the time being. Certainly won't be appearing in the Six Nations. We'll see whether he does return or when he returns. But it quickly became what was the media's responsibility in this whole situation, and I've been wanting to do a video on it. I've been trying to think about it and take it seriously so that I'm able to explain my kind of views on it, and I'm sure many of you will have views as well. So put it in the comment section down below. What do you make of it? How responsible are the media? And also, if I haven't already, hopefully I earn your subscription by the end of this video. If you want to subscribe to the channel, then I'd massively appreciate that, and hit a thumbs up on the video as well. Give it a like, give it a little boost. But let's get into it then. So you'd have all seen by now Owen Farrell stepping away from international rugby, putting his and his family's well-being, his mental well-being first. He's a player who is often in the eye of a storm, has had a lot of things written about him. He's been on the receiving end of a lot of abuse. And after he announced his decision to step away from international rugby, the story quite quickly developed into what was the media's role in this situation developing, in this situation being the reality. Mark McCall, his director of rugby, his coach at Saracens, in his pre-match press conference, put it all on the media really, said they were the reasons for this situation. So I want to talk about it. I think it's quite complex and nuanced, in all honesty. Hopefully in this video I'll be able to speak through a couple of things that kind of sprung to mind, the notes that I've made when I was thinking about this topic. And straight off the bat, actually, I'll start by saying this idea of the media as a whole, I think, is a bit of a problematic term in a way. And it's not just in rugby, it's not just in sport. We see it all the time, of the media. And I never really know what any of us mean by that, because I think the media covers such a wide variety of things in this day and age. It's not particularly specific at all. I mean, you've got newspapers and journalists, you've got online publications, you've got broadcasters, which is the side of things that I come from in terms of commentary and reporting and presenting and those sorts of elements. You've got podcasts, which are kind of broadcasting, but also are so big these days, they're almost their own thing. You've got content creation sites, which are driven by clicks and are naturally going to present information in a different way to try and drive clicks towards their website. You've got social media. There's so many different things that when people refer to the media, I find it such a vague term that I personally don't think it's particularly helpful, but that's just my view on that. Let's get into it, and straight off the bat, let me put the case forward for why the media are partially to blame, or maybe not to blame, but they could do things better. Sometimes they don't help themselves, and there will have been times where there will be columnists, ex-pros, pundits, occasions, I'm sure, with the amount that has been written about Owen Farrell, where it probably has overstepped the mark. And I think it's important as an industry that it's never personal. I'm sure at times maybe it does cross that line and go down that path, which it should never do. So I think it maybe has done at times for Owen Farrell. And there's no question that he as a player gets headlines and attention that I think you could argue no other player really gets. Maybe a Marcus Smith is starting to head in that direction, someone like that. I think Owen Farrell is the most recognisable England player of this current generation. I think if you spoke to people in England who weren't particularly rugby fans, I think there's a good chance that they will know Owen Farrell. People know who he is, even if they don't know that much about rugby, such as the profile that I think he has in terms of a rugby player. He's the England captain. He's the highest point scorer for England. He's a very well-known individual. But I struggle to see Mark McCall's argument that it is purely down to the media. And what I'll say here as well, we've got to be really careful, and it's such a fine line between being critical and being overstepping the mark, as I say, but we still need analysis and debate. Like, that's a really important and fair part of the sport. So for example, I think a fair article, balanced article that takes the discussion seriously of should Owen Farrell be the England captain is fair enough. Should he be the fly half when you've got George Ford and Marcus Smith waiting in the wings and there's different options there? Selection discussion is completely fair. And why does he have these high profile incidents of high tackles? Does he need to correct his tackle technique? Those sorts of discussions, analysis and constructive criticism, I suppose, is actually a really important part of the game. And so how we balance those two things, I suppose, is the big question here. And suppose the other thing as well is I know there have been a lot of negative things written about Owen Farrell. There's also been a huge amount of positive things. If you go back and look at the Lions in 2017, when he was starting over Johnny Sexton, he was the goal kicker, and there was no real debate around that. There have been people who put him in their team of the 2010s overall. He's England's top point scorer. I think there has been a lot of positive attention about him, and that maybe gets a little bit lost in some of this discussion. And that leads me on to the kind of PR communication side of things. Now, it's totally Owen Farrell's decision if he doesn't want to particularly engage with the media and if he wants to live as private a life as possible. That is totally his decision and understandable. The reality also is that, unfortunately, when you're the England captain, it's going to come naturally with a certain level of attention and scrutiny. And if you don't engage and control that, it's totally your decision, but you're also probably losing control of that narrative. If you don't want to do that, that's okay, but you are losing control of it. And I wonder, and this is a point that a colleague of mine, Alex Lowe, made on the Ruck podcast, which I'm also on, he made this week that said, is rugby as a sport mature enough to be able to give someone like Owen Farrell the correct kind of communications and PR advice? And whilst we can look at the media and, you know, we can be constructive and say that at times the media maybe does need to be better, should rugby be looking at itself in this situation as well? In that I go back to what I said about Farrell, possibly the most recognised England player at the moment, certainly the one who's under the biggest microscope and the most scrutiny. Is rugby as a sport, has it been able to deal with that situation well? Has he ever had the correct communications advice and PR advice to be able to help him control this narrative and situation? Because he's never really engaged with it. He's never really tried to change it. And I'll reiterate again, I've probably said it for about the fifth time. It's his right not to. But if he had been receiving proper communications advice and people who could help him get his point across, get what he was like as a person across better, I don't know, maybe I don't think it would necessarily have happened in a sport like football, for example, where that media attention, that media glare, I think they're much better set up to be able to protect the players, but also help them as well under that sort of spotlight. I think it's quite a fair question to ask of how much is rugby able to deal with that sort of spotlight for a player like Owen Farrell. The other thing to mention, and I think a really good example for why it didn't necessarily have to be this way for Owen Farrell, is someone like Dan Biggar. There are a huge amount of parallels between a Dan Biggar and an Owen Farrell. Dan Biggar, like Farrell, is a fierce competitor. He hasn't always received positive attention for the way in which he communicates with referees, a lot like Farrell. But what Dan Biggar has done, particularly over the last few years, is he's been brilliant in engaging with the media. I think you've often seen him in the media and you've seen him come across as the humble, engaging, just good bloke that he is. I don't have a relationship with Dan Biggar at all, but I know that people who have had to deal with him have said what a good bloke he is, and I think that helps change people's perceptions of him. Maybe Johnny Sexton as well. Look at Johnny Sexton with the way in which he often speaks to referees, the disciplinary that he had in the build-up to the World Cup, where he was following the official around the pitch after the Champions Cup final, but he's still, I think, seen in a much more positive light than Owen Farrell. I think there are times where with the right communications advice, Owen Farrell would have been able to help himself to help correct some of the misconceptions that are out there amongst the general public and amongst the media as well, maybe. So I hope that makes it clear. I suppose in conclusion to this video, I think the media can be better. As an industry, it should always strive to be better. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect, in fact. But I think it's a much more complex situation than simply blaming it on the media and them being purely responsible for this situation. In particular, how much better rugby could be to help deal with this. For the player in the future, the next England captain that gets over 100 caps and is under that sort of spotlight, is the sport able to help them in a way so that we don't end up with this situation? We don't end up with a player feeling that he needs to take time out of the game to give his mental health a bit of a break and to put himself away from the spotlight. And I suppose there's a wider discussion here as well in terms of, we've seen Wayne Barnes, we've seen Tom Foley this week as well, step away from the game because of the abuse they receive on social media. I think rugby is in an interesting position at the moment where it's changing. The attitude of the fans towards players is changing, towards officials, towards those in the game, the amount of abuse people are receiving. So let's hope it improves. But yeah, those are my kind of general thoughts on it. As I said at the top of the video, I hope I've been eloquent enough to explain that. At times I feel like I maybe wasn't, but it is one of those situations that, yeah, it's hard to, it's nuanced. It's complex and nuanced. As I said already, the media can be better, absolutely. Rugby can be better as well. That's my general thoughts. Let me know in the comments section. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you make of it? Like the video as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.